Hi, Mako.
Hey, Julia, good to see you. I
Good
was
to see
just I was just looking at your piece here on the Christianity Today. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
were you interviewed by Elise, or how did this happen? Elisa.
Yeah. We've known each other parasocially on Instagram. We followed each other
Yeah,
for a few years now.
yeah,
KJ Ramsey is really great about shouting people out on her
yeah,
stories, and we both
yeah,
ended up following each other as a
yeah,
result of that.
yeah,
And she is such a remarkable art
yeah.
historian,
She
and
is.
I'm honored that she
Yeah,
would think of my work in to write about.
yeah.
Um, So she reached out and was like, I've been asked to do this piece about embodiment and Advent, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that your prayer book series would fit really well with this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Mm-hmm.
think?
That's
And
so
so
good.
it's all thanks to her generosity and keen vision.
Yeah.
She fundamentally understands my work,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and invited me to do a show. She teaches at Covenant College
Yeah.
in Georgia, and she invited me to do a show there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so
Mm-hmm.
thankful that in the midst of times of division and separation, we've never even met in person.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And she she gets it,
Yeah,
and she
it does.
champions art and looking, and
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for her vision in the world.
Yeah. So it's in this month's Christianity Today. Um, Julia Hendrickson is featured. I want to read a paragraph and maybe you can comment on this. She says, the first paradox of Hendrickson's work is how she mines seemingly endless variations from a limited process and set of materials. And so she talks about how art is often um, maybe should flow out of our limitations and our limited boundaries that we embrace and we moved out of. But uh, what do you think about what she said?
I mean, I think it's accurate. I work with one color.
Yeah,
I work with one brush.
yeah,
I work with one paper.
yeah,
I work with one salt. I work
yeah.
like I
Well,
have constructed a very specific um regimen. And I think that in many ways that comes from my formative experiences,
mhm,
particularly in undergrad.
mhm,
Uh, the theme of the school at the time was freedom within a framework of faith.
mm,
And so
right,
that paradox of,
mhm, mhm,
yes, we are intentionally choosing
mhm,
a very specific path.
mhm,
And within that, there is abundance and possibility and
yeah,
freedom and creativity.
mhm,
And I think that that combination of things, in some ways, it's connected to like Hans Hofmann in the 50s and that push pull
mhm,
of
mhm,
art,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
Um, Always living in that paradox of restraint. And even as you were writing about the Impressionists and the Salon of the Refused, right?
right,
And it's that what are we pushing against? How does that strengthen
yeah,
us?
yeah,
Iron sharpening iron, right?
yeah,
All of these
yeah,
possibilities
yeah, yeah,
um, come when we're placed up against something. And
yeah,
it causes a different kind of innovation, right?
totally. And now your limitation is, as you noted, um, tied up with your materiality and also action, right? This is a liturgy that you go through, and so that highlights. It's almost like if if you consider it performance art,
Mhm.
there's specific time, specific place for what you're doing, which is also part of the language.
Yeah, I film live performance
Yeah,
every day,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because I share these time lapses of my painting process
yeah,
on Instagram. But
yeah.
it is painting is live performance.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it's a somatic experience, right?
Yeah,
As we paint, it doesn't happen in a disconnected fashion.
right.
These these paintings have movement because I've learned how to have pigment move across the page based on my action across the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how could those limitations and even consistency, um, you know, produce things that are infinitely, diverse and which is what she writes about here, um, and that leads to, of course, this theological reality or historical reality of the incarnation. Jesus, this infinite God becoming finite in a body. And so what you're doing, what I'm doing here is all about that process being enacted or reenacted in through our materials.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that. I mean, think about how many times you've laid out silver leaf. Is it ever the same?
No, never the same. Never the same. And I have been thinking a lot about particular silver of late, because of Instagram and digital format and AI and all that has um, become so much about this pretense of permanence, created on the screen when it really is not that, but it has this pretense of that. And so I wanted to focus on works that you cannot capture digitally, in a sense, and also silver because they will change over time. If you capture it, then it's already past, and it's continually evolving and changing and transmuting itself. So art, I think now increasingly, right, fundamentally, because we so want that locked in way of capturing something permanently. It's what you can't capture, I think, is maybe more important, So silver has been, yeah, my theme of late.
Yeah, I understand that. I've
Yeah.
been trying to find research on the effects of salt on paper,
Mm-hmm.
because I use salt. So can I
Mm-hmm.
claim
Mm-hmm.
that my work is still archival? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because sometimes salt can be a preservative and
Right.
sometimes it can be a corrosive.
Yes.
And there's not that much about the effect of salt on paper.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so it's this weird paradox that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you, it's different in that my pigments aren't as refractive as yours are, but the
Right.
salt crystals are.
Salt crystals are. Yeah.
And so it's that same conundrum of how do I actually document this in a way that's true to the work?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I frequently default to sharing time lapses of its creation process
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
trying to document the finished product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it doesn't capture.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So good.
Yeah, amazing. So what have you been noticing in the natural world? As the dean
Oh,
of nature for Goldenwood, what are
I
you what
know.
are you
I know.
noticing?
So we started this new effort called Goldenwood, which it's to me kind of an extension of the fellows program that you were part of, and it's a way to learn. It's an excuse for me to learn, right? To learn from you guys, but learn from the materials that I've always wanted to think about. And it seems to me, especially now, slowing down, right, to actually see and experience things is so important. And it actually has everything to do with how we take in information. And so, for instance, going to a museum and reading about the artist or, history or philosophy of that time, you really have to spend time immersed in reading, right? What they call deep reading, which is a lost art. Deep seeing is a lost art, and deep anything is a lost art. So I have been thinking a lot about how nature, which is so accessible to us in some ways, it's all around us, and we use natural materials, but at the same time, we don't have the language and really the ability and discipline to take in all that the materiality of the world can give us. And I think that's why I think you and I share in this longing to limit, embed ourselves. For me, I am going through the Psalms every morning, that, Psalms that Dr. Adam Davis has translated and you kindly read and record. And I listen to that over and over, at least 3 times, if not more, every morning before I start the day. And then the Psalm series, like your paintings behind you, are very limited in materials. I intentionally wanted to limit what I use, and so it's more of a meditative practice rather than illuminations. It's meditation. And so nature, whether it be embedded in materials, oyster shell, sumi ink, um, Belgian linen, or is embedded in there. And when I use my hands to create something, as a rhythm, liturgy of everyday work, it does something to your brain. It kind of not only slows it down, but everything you do on that day is changed from going at a, fast speed to being able to pay attention to what's happening in the world. And so that's kind of the process I want to, take this retreat as a way to excuse to slow down, but really be able to share what we see and what we hear, what we feel. And a lot of times, we don't use media to do this. In a way, we're doing that right now using Zoom and YouTube. But I think there's much more potential for instance, one of the things we're going to do is listen to one of the podcasts of Radio Lab, it's so well crafted, how the sound is interwoven. And it was done that way before there was, this so-called technology to do podcast. It was a radio program. And the way that they slow you down to listen to something that they're talking about, this episode is on deep sea octopus. It's called Octomom. And Hejin loves this. Listen to it over and over, and there's something profound about nature, because part of it is so mysterious and we don't know and understand it. When you uncover some reality, you are absolutely amazed and shocked, and like this thing exists, or the way that this creature, or things that you never pay attention to, is so miraculous, in their just habitat and regular, what they will be an ordinary, the way of living for them. And so those are things that I want to talk about.
Yeah. And so it's about not only the natural world, but our human experience,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And And it sounds like you're speaking so much about the experience of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
Jackson Pollock said, I am nature, right? So his action painting is all about, being in this rhythm, with nature. And I wonder if that kind of practice, which is more attuned to how we even look at the ground that we're standing on, the soil that composed of so many amazing micro, um, you know, biodiversity within the soil, and we don't really have a language for it anymore. So writers like Rachel Carson, and so many others, John Muir, and so many others over the years who have written about nature, um, to pay attention to the details of what is actually happening, and it will involve science and art and music. I would love to have Susie Ibarra be part of this because she has been such a person of attentiveness and paying attention to what's happening, hearing nature cry out in their ways of articulating, what is so devastating and painful. But at the same time, having to create anything is to have hope, in the future. This generative process of loving something and then creating something in response. So it's all of that is I think part of what we do as artists.
Yeah. And you mentioned hope, and I think it was in the most recent IAM newsletter, but it might
Mhm.
have been in your Substack. Um, you wrote about the rebellion of hope.
Yes, I did. Yeah, yeah,
And it's that fortitude it takes to keep
yeah,
hoping
yeah, yeah. It takes
and to
guts.
keep
Yeah,
participating in
yeah,
generative work
yeah,
in the midst of
yeah.
the post deconstruction.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't really. Well, I have been thinking about it, but not to this extent, until recent events, and how the world has become so toxic, in so many ways, right? Not just soil, but cultural dialogue, and how we see the future. And I realized, well, it is such a time as this, but we have to wake up and make that choice. Are we going to face that, and not necessarily directly, but in our studios, and be determined to press on and create something with hope. It doesn't have to be intentional or sentimental at all, but the fact that you're in your studio, painting is itself an act of hope, right? And I wanted to stay in that zone because um, so many people are in despair right now, right? And people have lost hope in the future of democracy, lost hope in um, leadership in many of the institutions, including churches. And but I think it's time, as I think about my our role as artists. This is precisely why we have been training ourselves, every day, creating these liturgies. And and I talk about Senno, who created this T form Sado aesthetic, really the basis of aesthetic of Japan. But and he did that during the feudal war times, Sengoku Jidai, which is the most violent and bloodiest time in Japanese history. And so I keep thinking about people like Frangelico who painted during the Black Plague, and led way by him faithfully creating that led into the Renaissance, right? And so many people, Hemingway writing in front wall, front lines of wars, J.D. Salinger coming back with traumatized psyche, needing to write but couldn't write, so Catcher in the Rye is a result of literally him waking up every morning to write a novel that he's always thought he could write, but he had to go through that process of regaining hope in being able to get up in the morning to articulate something that was that was in his heart. So I think this is a time when all of us as artists and all of us as human beings, we need to kind of step back and recalibrate, reconsider, repent, redo everything, and then get to our studios and get to work.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like doing the work, you're learning.
Yes.
Doing the work, you're hoping.
Yeah.
Doing the work, you're forecasting a different vision.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think so much recently, the dialogue that I've been in with friends has been, so what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what are you making? How are you building your community where it is right now? And that's the generative work, right? But it only happens in the doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in speaking about it and in saying, this is what I want, and being explicit about the future you want to see or the thing that you hope for.
Yeah. Already in doing, there's the future.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're spinning into the world something that hopefully will be caught by somebody else and that they will be inspired. And of course, that word do has been overtaken by this industrial activism. And part of what's been interesting about speaking at University of Pennsylvania with Hedgen is that she, as an activist lawyer, right, and talks about how you cannot, as a justice advocate, ever think that your work is going to end because it just keeps going, and that can be really frustrating if you are a person who seeks justice, right? And yet the flip side of that is because we have never lived in a world where justice was fully true or fully present. We have this longing for it, right? And same thing with beauty. Like I can truly say that the vision that we may have as artists is, in a sense, never fulfilled. It's like a moving target. It's it gets bigger and bigger once you approach it. But that kind of frustration as artists to always create and fall short of that, in a sense, is also creates a deeper longing for beauty. So both beauty and justice are deep longings unfulfilled. But at the same time, right, we in times such as this, because we might be despondent about the future, we can also flip that and say, but there's a deeper longing that we all share, and yes, we can be frustrated together, and that's okay. But like you're saying, I think what are we doing is a question not just to create something industrially, right? Just this mode of being active and making something in an industrial mode, but doing in the word poietes, Greek is to do, is to make, is to be a poet, right? Literally, it means being a poet, and so we need to steward that opportunity, and despondency turned into this act of creativity and innovation. And because we are hampered and limited and maybe pushed into a corner, that's exactly what where we can create something that rise above the limitations, right? So the language there for us is very important today, to harness that together and to have these conversations, but also communities that, hopefully we will grow in our way to talk about culture care, but in so many other aspects, there'll be, I think, more and more opportunities, and more, because there should be more hunger for it.
Mhm. Yeah. One of my friends was traveling this summer, and she was in Venice at the Biennale, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what struck her so profoundly was Venice isn't, it's a destination now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the thriving culture that it was in the
Mm-hmm.
Renaissance, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And she was truly very encouraged by that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it showed post-empire
Yes.
what can happen,
Yes. Yes.
and that there was still generative work being done there, and there were still people that were thriving in a different way there,
Yeah. Yeah.
even after the fall of this great city in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was just this other vision that she came to see through that.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think there's so much talk of empire and systems of and structures of power,
Mm-hmm.
and people keep making dinner.
Exactly. Exactly.
We keep talking to each other.
Yes.
The leaves on the trees fall.
Yeah.
The flowers will come out in the spring.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that things things keep moving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing beautiful about Venice is, because it's a medieval city, Google Map doesn't really help you, right? Because it interpolates your movement in such a way that it's actually not helpful. It's better to get lost and just, pay attention and walk into that little corner cafe, or, crevice of, and they built in these art rooms, throughout the city. And so it's like, instead of having a destination, you want to go and just spend time getting lost. And I feel like that's an appropriate metaphor for today. We have thought that, through our technology and ideologies and medicine and all that, we have a straight and narrow path, right? That every detail is mapped out, and we won't get lost. Well, we that turned out to be a false narrative. But I think if we can accept that it's better to get lost, just enjoy the day, and also be in that communal mindset of sitting down in a that cafe, and having a meal together, and having a conversation that we perhaps would never have if we are going from A to Z quickly and efficiently. um, I wonder if that might be a metaphor for our future, and being on this adventure too, right? Not knowing where you're going.
Because
And
to sit
yeah,
and eat with each other is to
yeah,
participate in the eternal.
yes, right. And that's the paradox, is we realize and recognize that only when you don't have that projected sense of where you need to be, and you waste time together. You talk about things that are not purposeful, or have maybe even no meaning. But at the same time, you realize, we are human beings and not human doings. As Nigel reminds us, we are meant to be together, and our art should flow out of that rather than this transactional, uh, prescriptive way that our world has become. This reality of gaining fame and going in the auction scene. Those are gonna be there, but I think what is enduring will always be made, in this meandering maze labyrinth, of, us getting lost and being truthful to that moment, being present in that moment.
Mhm. Yeah. Here's to getting lost.
Yes, to getting lost. Wonderful to have this conversation, Julia.
So
Thank
good. Thank you,
Okay.
Mako.
Okay. Blessings.